Okay, awesome. So it's Kimberly again, and it's another installment in our Northglenn Youth Theater series called Not Just Acting, Other Jobs in the Theater. And I'm so excited today to have our guest, Mitch Dailey, who is here to talk about tech, talking tech for sure. He has seen all of how Northglenn Youth Theater has grown over the years, so he has that advantage, but now he can talk about all the stuff bigger, beyond, and into the future with tech stuff. So anyway, I'm gonna turn it over to Mitch. Mitch, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your job, your stuff.
Awesome. Well, hello. Let's see, when I started NYTA when I was 12, back in 2006. So yeah, I started that as an actor, and then I quickly fell into tech when Christopher Waller became the new technical director over at the theater, which was a super awesome opportunity. As a young guy, you know, in theater and in love with the community and the storytelling that goes on there. I still have very fond memories of everyone I've met to this day. Who I met in that theater, and especially the experiences I've had. And going into tech was just another aspect of that, because I think at that point, I really found what I wanted to do and how I could help these shows that we put on for people really thrive and become larger than life, all without anyone really knowing I'm doing it, which I thought was actually really fun. So I started off as a carpenter. And I built a bunch of the shows and came in for all of those work calls with Waller. And I can't tell you how many power tools he taught me to use and to measure things out and to be smart and being safe around everything we were doing. And later on, I figured out that this is what I wanted to be doing. So I actually went to the Metropolitan State University of Denver and joined their theater program as a BFA, the Bachelor of the Fine Arts, with an emphasis in lighting. When I initially got there, I think it was a really great opportunity for me to kind of dip my toes in a lot of different waters in the tech realm. So I started off also as a workshop kid. So when we started building all of the scenery for the shows and having the new technical director there, Brian Kelly, wonderful influence in my life, probably one of the smartest people I've met. And going through his like Stagecraft 101 class, I learned a lot of parallels of what I learned between Waller and a lot of things that I could expand on to help me be a better technician and work on communication and delegation and really being part of a crew member to make these shows better than ever, which was a wonderful opportunity. So, you know, starting off in a scene shop, we were all working together, and I think that was the biggest realization for me of all of the aspects and how deep you go into building all of these things. So we got into, you know, computer-aided drafting as well as hand drafting and seeing all of the plans laid out right in front of you, and you're like, great, this is your project for the day. You have 8 hours to get it done. So we would hop in and work as hard as we could, learning new techniques along the way to create some of the coolest things I think I've ever seen in the realm of theater and on this scale, especially in education. With that, I guess some of the best opportunities for me in theater and starting at the education level was really learning about all of the organizations that can help you along the way. So USITT is a national organization, the United States Institute of Theater Technology, and they work with education as well as professional theaters around the nation, really, and even outside of, to connect students to professional vendors as professional theaters as well, and really integrate those two societies so that the students have a better opportunities for learning. And that brought along console trainings and workshops about things from, you know, putting a caster on a platform and creating wagons or knife tracks on stage, all the way to advanced programming techniques for different lighting consoles. And I definitely took advantage of a lot of that. And the coolest thing about being at those conferences was not only the workshops, but getting to go to the expo floor and meeting with all of these vendors and different people so that you can, you know, see what they have to offer and see how they've grown their own footholds in this crazy entertainment industry we call home, to really be able to find an opportunity and a job that you can thrive in, and find a new community that you can work with and learn so much. So I call around, I think my first time at USATT was in Salt Lake City in 2017, 16. And I had the wonderful opportunity to go and interview with the Walt Disney World Entertainment Division. And I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't so much as like I had the opportunity, I stalked that booth for a while. I'm a huge Disney kid. I've loved the movies, I've loved the parks, I've traveled them for so long. So I was like, I'm gonna figure out a way how I can go and work there and see how they're developing and being like one of the leading businesses in entertainment and all they have to offer. So when I went and interviewed with them, I talked to Dirk Ring, who was the entertainment manager at Epcot, which was really crazy. Actually talking to him and being like, oh, you run Epcot. This is what you do. And he was a super wonderful guy who asked me all of these questions about power distribution and cabling and making sure I really had the information and the knowledge to be able to be a part of their team, be part of their cast, as they like to call it, I should say. And that was really cool. So leading back a little bit, what kind of got me there to get all that knowledge is that outside of just theater, I found a lot of opportunities I could really expand my knowledge of what I was learning in school. Because inside of school, within that lighting program, I became a master electrician who was in charge of cabling and plotting and dealing with all the power distribution and getting the lights up and running so that when the designer came in, they would be able to cue the show, work through all of the rehearsals, and really fine-tune that final project or show. I'm looking for a better word and I'm spacing on it. But within that, it took me to looking for other things of where I can apply a lot of that knowledge. And Kimberly's husband actually does own a event production company called North End Sound, previously North End Sound, now Productive. And I joined him as well while I was in college to working with different clients and production companies to put on corporate events and concert series, all the way to fashion shows, which was really crazy and a really fun opportunity. But I think with all of that under my belt, bringing that to USITT and networking with all of those people, I was able to get that position as well. So for BFA, we required an internship program. We needed 6 credits over our time, which equated to I think it was really only about 120 hours. But I took this job and was there for 4 months. So within the Walt Disney World, it was called the Professional Internship Program. I was able to join their entertainment team and work in all 4 of the Disney parks. So the Magic Kingdom, Animal Kingdom, Hollywood Studios, and Epcot. And I think the coolest thing about that was seeing all of the different varieties of events they had going on, anywhere from small little street atmosphere performances like the Dapper Dans, who are always walking around singing their songs on Main Street, all the way to a massive music festival at the ESPN Worldwide of Sports, which included 7 different stages, all headlining bands. And I think within that was my real big first opportunity to work on this scale that I had imagined and I was able to actually do later on. I mean, and the stage shows too. You know, you see Festival of the Lion King, where all of those floats are coming in with the characters, and it's a massive indoor hut and a wonderful interactive experience with 4 vocalists telling the story of the Lion King. And that was, I think, all with just in that stage, because I was there for 2 weeks. I was doing, I started off opening curtains for actor entrances, which is a huge part as paging, as well as handing off props. And then it went all the way up to running the sound and/or light console, and then to dealing with the acrobats and the pneumatic systems and the winches to make the birds fly in the center of the stage, and overseeing, maintaining, and running that system. So I think that opportunity to work in all of those parks gave me a major perspective on how and what I wanted to do, and how I think I could have gotten there. It was amazing to me to see so many different things happening in that space, and I was like, you know what, there are a few things in here I want to do. I just have to figure out where else in the world besides very muggy and hot Florida that I can do them. So my next year at USITT, I networked with several companies within Denver and met actually a few technicians in Denver that I hadn't met before. And they brought me into some of their home theaters. So at that point, I was still in college. I had just gotten off of this internship, and then I started working around a lot of the other theaters in Denver, like the Aurora Fox or the Vintage Theater or the Town Hall Performing Arts Center down in Littleton. And at that point, I was taking their plots, listening to their technical director, and just going in and working. And I think that was the coolest part for me, was just getting and having so much knowledge and so much stuff under my belt that I was just able to go and work somewhere. You know, I could walk in one day and be a carpenter, or I could hang a plot and then cable everything. And it really brought to test a lot of my knowledge of power distribution, cabling, and networking, especially within the lighting world. And that was a super cool opportunity to have just that time for a job. You know, I could go out and really work with that. And I think that's the biggest part, is definitely just networking with a lot of the people around you and trying to figure out when you can go in and volunteer. I bet you they will always, despite, well, let's say when COVID-19 is not going on, anyone would be willing to take anybody into a theater to just look at the set, you know, check out the lighting plot, see the props backstage, and then figure out a volunteer opportunity, which could eventually lead to a paid opportunity to be able to, you know, help them grow their sets and their audience and their connection with a lot of other technicians in your area. So instead of just working with technicians in my area, then one thing I started to do is that I got in with the Local 7 Denver, IATSE, which is the International Alliance of Theatrical Stagehands. Wow, I definitely just messed that up. International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. Whew, it's been a day. And that is, you know, our union. That is, it covers film, expo, and stage. So I went in with them, and they handle contracts over at the Denver Center of the Performing Arts. So that'd be the Buell and the Ellie, which are the main 2 touring theaters, as well as, you know, the Space, the Ricketson, the Stage, and you can get contracts to go and work at those theaters as well. So right when I had graduated, after doing my Emmy positions and moving into lighting design and really working with that and growing that lighting design, especially with North End Sound and Productive, I was able to go in and start stagehanding for a lot of the bigger shows coming through. I think I was really fortunate because Max Peterson, who was, I'd say, a half MSU Denver alum, he became the dispatcher for the Local 7 union. So the dispatcher, what they do is that they have this massive collection of employees that he will call everybody and look at the calendar of what shows are in either Red Rocks or the Buell or the convention center. And he would call them and get them into work and sort people out in their specific departments. Having known him, I actually worked with him on Guys and Dolls, which was my senior lighting design project at Metro. He was the sound designer. And I think one of the funnest things is that we got to know each other pretty well during those first few weeks. And he's like, hey, you need to come work for the union. When are you gonna come work for me? Please give me a call. And after about 2 months, I was like, I knew that the standard for working for the union is that if they call you in that hiring hall, that's a huge opportunity for work, and you never want to turn that down. And I knew I was never going to be able to turn that down for classes. I was never going to call in and say I'm available for work to only get a call and say, hey, I'm sorry, I have this class or I have rehearsal. So once I graduated, that was my first step into really doing what I wanted to do on the scale of where I wanted to be at the time. So he called me in, and my very first gig with IATSE was actually working the School of Rock loadout after their 3-week sit in Denver at the Buell. And I don't think I've seen anything more eye-opening than that first gig I worked at the Buell. Walking into this massive theater that I had toured, I had seen, and I'd seen shows at since I was a little kid. The very first show I saw there was Little House on the Prairie in like 2004, 2005. And then the year after that, I saw Wicked, and then Mary Poppins, and then I found myself there like every few months. You know, I was in love with it. I was doing all of the shows at North Glen, moving into event production, and I could not get enough of theater. So actually walking back there and seeing this full-grown show and these crew members who have been doing it for year after year of on the road, I was like, that's what I want to do. I got to figure this out. So I worked that loadout with School of Rock, and then I did the load in and load out of On Your Feet. And then I got my first show call, which was actually ridiculous because the way IATSE works when you call that hiring hall, you have to be 18 or older to join. You start on the D list, and after 500 hours on the D list, you move to the C, and then after 1,000, you move to the B, and then after a full year and or 1,500 hours, you get on the A list. And typically A list are all of the cardhold members, so the people who are paying into the dues. So paying your dues essentially is, you know, paying money into the union so that you can receive your benefits. So they have the IATSE National Welfare and Benefits account, which pays for my health insurance, or I pay through for my health insurance, as well as all of the other opportunities and connections IATSE has. And that can move to transferring to other locals or give you opportunity for touring gigs. So I think I was on the C list at the time. I got my first show call. So I was one of the running technicians as a local with Les Mis for 3 weeks, and I was one of the truss spotlight operators. So I was on stage with the actors, you know, 20 feet in the air on top of this little skyscraper that tracked on and off stage left and right, lighting people during the scenes and taking calls from those crew members. And Les Mis, still at this time, is run by Networks Production Company, which is based out of Maryland. So a lot of these shows have come through are one of the big five, as we like to call them, which would be Networks, Troika Entertainment, there's Aurora, there's Worklight, and then there is Juniper 101. And they all hold these different shows that are the yellow card contracts to be able to tour them across the nation. So after working for about, I think I did 6 yellow card shows when I just started with the local. I was my next year USITT, I was out of college. I went there as a young professional, and I started interviewing with those companies. And the coolest thing for me was going up and talking to the companies about all of their touring opportunities and what they had coming up. That I was able to connect a lot of the dots with the production managers who were there about people I had met in Denver and who I had met on the road, and definitely people that I kind of Facebook stalked them for a little bit. They had known me, I'd gotten to know them for a little bit. I friend requested them when I was asking them questions of like, how can I start touring? How can I start doing this on a national level and really be where I want to be? Because again, once I had gotten into college and I had learned about the union, I was like, that's it for me. That's where I would love to be in the next 2 years. So after interviewing with them, it went really well. They had referenced me with Max Peterson, who had previously toured on Beauty and the Beast, as well as in international and national, as well as several other technicians I had met. It went well again. Someone is at my door. I apologize. I don't know who at this time. Cool.
The beauty of the live interview. That's so funny.
We're assuming it's a package. I have nothing being delivered.
That's funny.
Like walking around the house. This is fun. Live interview, folks. Live theater.
Right? Totally.
So I interviewed with them, and I went back home to Denver. And a week and a half later, I received a call from them to join and fill their first national tour of A Bronx Tale, which is based off of the 1994 movie with Robert De Niro and Chaz Palminteri about Italian mobsters in New York, and it was based in the 1960s. And after they called me, I was working a cancer con with Philip. We were loading in. I received the call, and they said, we would like you here in 4 days. And that's when it really hit me, and I was like, okay, all right, let's do this. And at the time, I kind of knew what I was getting myself into. But when I flew into North Carolina in Durham, I had to be up and running by 5:30 in the morning. We started loading at 6 a.m. Like most of our days, we had a 6 a.m. load in. And then that same day, we would have a 7 or 7:30 show. I met all of the other crew members and walked into this space and realized, and I walked down to the plaster line and I just looked out at that theater in Durham and I was like, all right, this is it. This is what I want to be doing for the rest of my life, at least, you know, for the next 7 or 8 years until I can work myself into bigger positions. And I don't think I found like another more inviting home than all of those folks who have been on tour for so long. And I was really lucky because the crew I was with had been on multiple shows together beforehand. So our head carpenter, there were 12 crew members altogether. There were 2 electricians, a deck carpenter and a head carpenter, as well as our flyman, which made the carp, so that was 5. We had our props, and then we had 2 costumers, a wig, and then our stage manager. And we had 2 assistant stage managers as well. But at a loss for words, it was the craziest transition I think I've ever experienced, because I had worked for so long in Denver as a local, and what each yellow card show requires and what they call locals is that the people that have the unions within these theaters, we hired 56 technicians in each city for a day or 2, and then at least 20 for the show run to come in and build this show with us. So here I am walking into Durham, not knowing what this show is, except for watching a live feed of it, not a live feed, but a feed of it on the airplane over, walking in the next morning and putting it all together. So the transition into IATSE life and working on a paint card was a huge learning curve, because not only did I just, before I was being delegated tasks and, like run these cables, patch all of this in, or light people, easy enough with a spotlight. But it now turned into having to have the knowledge of the entire show. And Bronx Tale, we were an IATSE M, or a non-league M. So what that meant is that all of the shows are based on scale and how big they are and how many people are required to work on that show, or how big of a space we go to. So we'll call like a league L right now will be Hamilton, and like a non-league S would be SpongeBob. And you would say there's not much difference between those scales, but it depends on the theaters that they're playing and how big their schedule is. So when I had signed on with the Bronx Tale, I had 3 months to finish out. We went to 9 cities, and we were there for an average of, I think it was just a week to 3 weeks at that time. But learning that show within the next 2 weeks, because my previous assistant, Liam, who was really wonderful, they were in with me and walking me through the show. So it's a 4 electric show, 3 trusses, 1 strip light. And then we had 9 separate battens in each theater that were set practicals. So at that point, it's working and learning the collaboration of everyone in the crew, as theater is a huge collaborative effort to begin with. But it was really understanding and working with your crew so that you can put that show in the most timely manner and honestly make it perfect. Because that's the thing about moving a traveling show, is I was so used to building a show over 3 months and then running it for a 1 to 3 week period. But at this point, I had to start learning how to build an entire show in a day, run the show, and then later on down the life, during the second national of the tour, it was down to 1 night. So it was a 6 a.m. load in, a 7 o'clock show, and a 9 or 10 p.m. load out. So it was a 10-hour in, 3-hour show, 5-hour out. And that was all condensed into that one day. So I was like, I have to learn this so fast. But again, I had the most supportive group around me to be able to really fine tune a lot of the skills, keep my ears open, my eyes open, and recognize what had to be done in front of me to get things up and rolling. And having worked with Productive and Disney, being part of a crew is a huge thing, but learning how to also delegate those locals around you, because the locals, as the Electrics team, we would have 12 people at our jurisdiction. Typically 2 are up on the bridge loading weight for the show, so we'd have 10 down on deck. Is having all of those people move from point A to point B, or from A to C to E to F to Z, all depending on what you could get done around you, was crazy.
Yeah. Hey, so Mitch, when you're thinking, when talking about the different positions or different jobs that are associated in tech, it's much broader, right, than maybe you were even aware of when you started out, right? Because I think kids, when they start doing tech, at least in the middle school to high school level, there's the obvious ones, there's the lighting, there's the sound, etc. But can you speak a little bit more about how many more, how much broader it is when you go into tech theater than just the big hitters, if you will, the larger jobs, if you will?
Yeah, definitely. I think it kind of breaks down in each department, and what was craziest to me is that, so if we start with lighting in my specific department, we'll start with our main lighting designer, right? Who would be in there queuing the show. That's the big hitter. something we all love to see. And then below that are his associate designers, which will actually be the ones who are calling most of the shots during the show, depending on early stage of the process. And then below that is the production electrician, which is hopefully one of my future roles, is what I want to love to get into. But they're the ones who actually, so for instance, on a Broadway show, everything that you see, sound, light, carpentry, costumes, all come from our different shops. So Production Resources Group, or PRG, is one of the biggest rental shops across the nation, hands down. So we would go to those shops and prep all of our shows before they went out and rebuild them. So we would start with nothing. We'd have an inventory list, rather, of all of the truss, lights, cables we need. And the production electrician is in charge of gathering all of those materials. And then below that would be the head electrician and the assistant electrician, who are the two that work hand in hand with the production as well as the designers to build and assemble the entire show and get it ready for the road. So just within lighting itself, you have those 5 positions, you know, and then that leads down to locals as well and shop hands who would be in there with us building our gear. We would hire in local labor from the shops. And then within carpentry, it kind of goes down that same pipeline of there's the designer, the associate designer, then there's the production carpenter, and then head assistant, deck, flyman, all within that as well. So it really depends, I think, on how big a role is on how much you want to do within the job and how or where you want to be on that hierarchy and who you want to be communicating with to get the job done as best as possible. Again, I think it kind of follows that same rhythm of there's always the designer, the associates, the production, and then the head, the assistant, and then the locals. So you can really find your spot of where you want to be on, I guess it really depends on how much responsibility you want to have, which is weird enough to say, but if something doesn't come together, it depends on whose head it kind of falls on. But in the end, it's all of us still, if something doesn't go wrong, it's all of us coming together to figure out that best possible way of figuring it out and getting things done.
And it seems like everybody, even though there is the hierarchy, everybody is responsible to understand the jobs within that hierarchy, so that they can jump in if they have to, or it isn't strictly that you go, you know, I want to be a lighting designer, and suddenly you jump all the way to the top and you design here. Instead, it's more like a growing learning process where you got to put in the work and the labor and be willing to do the things that require a lot of physical activity too. Not just making it pretty or designing. And I don't mean to minimize it, but I think a lot of kids in the tech world start out with seeing the tip-top highlight thing because at school, you know, there aren't as many kids available to do it. But then when you get on the larger scale, you have to be ready to kind of get your hands dirty, if you will, and move up the chain, if you will.
I mean, so yeah, it was crazy to me enough when I started as an assistant electrician, just being the front of house spotlight operator. I was there to assist the load-in, to get everything done and help out. And then moving into that head role, or even as the assistant role, if Mike, my previous head, wasn't able to get much done, I would hop into his role and I would be, you know, connecting motors or repairing a bunch of stuff. Especially like the head electrician was in charge of a lot of the moving lights. So I became a huge moving light repair technician with Mike, and I got that opportunity and he guided me along the way. When I jumped into the head position, that's when it became down to a ton of paperwork. So within that, I also started having to roll into the production electrician role and contacting all of the shops, PRG, and collaborating drop-offs or new rentals if we needed something to show or something needed to be replaced. And the production electrician also often jumps into the associate designer role. So we're all kind of working our way up the ladder as we go, depending on each of our tasks, just to aid each other. So I think that's the biggest thing is if you're starting, just as a local, you get more of that responsibility and have to learn all of those other roles just so you can get to where you want to be. Like Hal Binkley right now is my previous designer for A Bronx Tale, and he's a, I think, 4-time Tony winning designer, and he's done some amazing work. And learning who his assistants or his associates are, he will not go anywhere without his team at that point, because they've all worked so hard to become this close-knit little group and assisted each other in so many ways that they want to stay together. And they're one of the best teams in the industry because of that, I think. And it's all teamwork. You have to be a team player and really work as hard as you can to learn and to grow together so that everything will just go along smoother. Yeah.
So if you are now you're where you are and you're looking back, what would you say for a kid who is just feeling the call for tech like that? Like you said, this is the groove, this is what speaks to me, this is what makes me tick. What are the things that you would share? Hey, make sure you study this, or things that you didn't anticipate you would need to know how to do?
I would say if you're working through school right now, or if you're working through NYTA, I would find another outlet for your work, definitely, because that's gonna be the best opportunity for you to really put yourself in check and understand, hey, this is the knowledge I do have, here's what I need to have, and here's what I would like to have. And I think some great opportunities and outlets for that are USITT has a lot of stuff going for them. So go and do those workshops. If you're interested in more drafting or to be a technical director, I didn't know this until I was a year into college, but Vectorworks and AutoCAD, they have free trials for any student. So if you just email one of their reps, they will send you a full license so that you can just poke around in the software. And there are a plethora of YouTube tutorials out there or books that will give you online workshops and teach you all of the basics. And having a really good grasp on that before you get to like the collegiate or the more professional level is going to be a massive foothold for you to really be able to be like, hey, here's the initiative I've shown, here's what I want to do, here's where I'd like to be. And I think a lot that people are going to be more willing to work with you, and they're going to be very inviting to be like, yes, please come help us, because I definitely showing that initiative and putting in the hard work, that's one of the biggest things that's going to help you network and understand and learn about everything that's out there that you can do. One of the biggest things as well is there's USITT holds a mild certification program called the Essential Skills for Entertainment Technicians. And those are tests that you can take to get a certificate to understand a baseline or a more advanced knowledge of stagecraft in all of your certain departments. So there's carpentry, there's lighting, there's technical direction, and then there's costuming. And that includes a written test, not a written test, but it's an online test that you can take that falls from a bank of 200 questions. You have to answer about 75 of them. So they rotate, and you can take it as many times as you need. So you can get through that test. And then if you go to the conference, there is a tactile test as well. So the customers can go through and build things, or you can work at one of the light or sound labs that happen and work with, show them your understanding of power distribution and plugging things in and making sure that everything's safe and, OSHA approved. As well as, speaking of OSHA as well, once you get further into that level, get an OSHA certification, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, like an OSHA 10 or an OSHA 30. That will give you a huge understanding of just safety in the workplace. And I think one of the biggest things about doing this is making it safe, and having that strength of knowledge, so that if you ever see anything, whether it be, you know, at a youth theater all the way to a touring house in Elmira, New York, you're going to look at it and be like, you know, I'm not so sure I should do that right now. Let's all reconvene and collaborate of how we can make this better and safer for us and still get that same end result project. So I think there are a lot of really good resources out there to just help you along the way. And especially for lighting specific, if you want to go into a design role, work on programming. So ETC, if you're working on any of their EOS family constables, I know most of people are going to have an ETC element in their high school theater. There are plenty of online tutorials that I would definitely recommend. I still reference those to this day. You know, if I'm sitting down at a console, I remember how to do something, but I'm like, you know, there's a better way to do this. I will look those up in a heartbeat, because our theater is very, it's very giving. You know, a lot of people out there will want you to have that best amount of knowledge so that you can all succeed at your job and you can thrive together and build things together. And I think that's definitely going to be the biggest part, is just finding any online resources you can to help you out along the way. You know, if you have a little dry spell, I mean, during this whole thing, I've gone through 4 different console trainings, and I've done my OSHA 10 again, and I've re-upped my certifications because I'm just like, I need to still be working and doing something and bettering myself, so that not only do I have that love for theater, I'm a nerd, I'll go through that stuff all day, but it's also making yourself more marketable, so that when you have those networking opportunities with, you know, Walt Disney World or any touring production or a summer stock at a theater, you're definitely going to be able to have a better in with them.
Yeah, it's kind of a hustle a little bit for yourself, right?
Really
You have to be able to put yourself out there, be able to be willing to network. You've talked a lot about networking, you know, who knows whom, and pursuing something where you see it and you're like, you know what, that's where I want to get to, and then figure out who you need to know, and just keeping yourself motivated to move forward through learning, being constantly willing to work where you need to, kind of where they need help first, so that you can build those relationships. And so it's a lot, it's interesting, you know, because you think of the actors and the cast, you know, being a core group of people as teamwork, but beyond that, it's like all these different other teams that are working together to make this team's actions work, you know, and come together. And so, like you said, it's big about being a team and working together, while also, you know, hustling yourself, saying, hey, I'm ready to do it, and I can do it, and I want to do it. And that's pretty awesome. I did have, Nick asked a question a little bit back, and I just want to make sure I get it asked to you, Mitch. He asked about, when you were at Disney, did you do predominantly lighting, or what would you say that was some of what you did, the most of what you did? Like, how did that tie in when you were over at Disney?
Yeah, I would say I predominantly did lighting. You know, when I was there, I sold myself as a lighting technician. So one thing that I was really fortunate to have is I made a great connection with a lot of the production planners that were there. So anytime there was a large live event, such as, you know, the music festival at ESPN Worldwide Sports, or I was there during the holiday seasons. So when we were setting up for the Halloween parade or the Christmas parade, I would do all the atmospheric lighting and, you know, put a boom and a bass, hook up all the lights, make sure they're nice and safe, tip those up, address them, walk away, and then we would program them later. But besides that, let's see. At Frozen, I was a lighting console operator, but I also loaded all of the confetti between each show. I swept all of that. I did a lot of sound while I was there as well. Since sound and lighting kind of went hand in hand, depending on the text, they would try to get someone who knew both. So we would be setting up all of the small stage positions. I'm trying to think when I did like any carpentry. The thing about that is a lot of that stuff comes fabricated in from outside shops. But there are all of the props people at each stage would be doing a lot of the repairs. So I know I repaired some like paper. It was like a really thin Luan like birds or paper, and there were some paper mache birds I repaired at Lion King. There was one day I replaced the door handle on the gates for Mickey's Royal Friendship Fair at Cinderella Castle. So that was some random carpentry I did. Otherwise, yeah, I think it was kind of just that day-to-day, just running the shows and the events of, you know, making sure a fader's pushed up when someone starts talking. And I think that was the biggest thing for me that I learned while I was there, is that all of this was such a fine-tuned and oiled machine that it ran flawlessly all of the time. You know, that was their standard because that's how they set it up to be. There's a system called Show Control that they would run through a Grand MA system, which is another huge lighting console. But all of that, it was all time coded, you know, so you would press, like, if I were running Frozen, you know, I think there were about 520 cues in that entire show, including parts. And I would press the button like 70 times, you know, for all like the visual based stuff. The rest of it was tied in with sound. And I think the biggest learning curve for me while there was like, as cool as this is, and that I'm working on all of these big shows. Oh, I'm thinking about Phantasmic. I did a lot of pyrotechnics. I actually got my Florida pyrotechnic certification. So it is expired now, but I was able to work with the 1.3 and 1.4G products, depending on size. And I loaded fireworks for a lot of the shows. And that was actually the coolest thing, because they have this little compound you go back to, and it's all of their different bunkers of all the fireworks, and they would drive up their trucks and load them in. But then they had like this one spot in the middle where you could like learn to set off fireworks. I think that was the coolest day that a couple of other interns had, is that we were just there safely blowing stuff up. But yeah, since it was so fine-tuned and well-oiled that you couldn't do much, I wanted something that was a little more hands-on. So though I see myself, you know, possibly going back to Walt Disney World in the future, I wanted to be, you know, a bigger component of what I was doing. I wanted to be, you know, boots on the ground every day, though I didn't know it would always be like 21 hours a day. I wanted to be building all of that stuff and working with the local technicians and really having that amount of teamwork to get everything up. So when I did the special event at Disney, that was my bread and butter. That's everything I wanted. But everything else, it was a blast, and it was a great opportunity, but it was really low key. It was a lot of babysitting gigs because you were there to watch a console do its job, and you're like, sweet, that was fun. But I love to be busy. I'm a busybody through and through.
Cool. Were there any classes that you think you're like, make sure you take a blank class as you go along in tech, like regardless of which discipline you're going in, like, you know, welding or, you know, that kind of stuff?
Welding class is very helpful. I've taken 3 welding classes. I haven't welded in like a year though. Super helpful, and that's a specific discipline, but a computer-aided drafting class or a hand drafting class. Because so many theaters, that's our main medium of communication, is looking at a plot, and being able to read it. For instance, I still have this pulled up. How do I do this again? But if we are gonna, oh, I cannot share my screen. That's totally fine.
Go ahead.
But I have a light plot from my show that if I did not know how to read this, I would be just done for. Let's see if it loads up. Of course, it's taking forever to buffer. But it's reading stuff like this that really is something that needed. Okay, I promise I'm a technician. But it's understanding how to read all of your draftings to make sure that everything is as accurate as possible. Because the way we did this, it had to be, it had to be through and through. So on is it showing my screen or is it not?
Yep.
Okay, great. So like over on the left-hand side here, this is our line set schedule of where everything needs to be. And it has all of those distances marked out and where my electrics would lie within those. But it's also reading any plan. So I have like half of this set that is drafted into here. So these are the apartment windows of where they lay. And I know that, these 4 lights right here are going to be the main ones that are shooting them. So it's creating those distances and making sure that nothing is going to conflict and be safe in the air, that you're best going to succeed you're best going to succeed so that nothing goes wrong.
Cool.
Get into hand drafting or a CAD class. That is going to be the biggest thing that I think will help you out throughout all of this. It's crazy how many plots I've had to read. If something changes eventually later in the day and we have to add something, I have to know and to be able to interpret all of these drawings so that right away and as quickly as possible, I can get that done. I think that was the first thing I asked to do when I got in college, is that I want to see an actual ground plan. And I want to be able to create those light plots and make them, so much better.
Awesome.
I don't know how to unshare my screen at this point, but yeah, I'd say that's the biggest thing, because that's how you're going to be able to communicate with a lot of these people of what you do. How many times I walked into like the convention center and they hand me a piece of paper and they're like, all right, cool, this is what you're doing for the next 8 hours. I'm just like, all right.
Okay.
Here we go,
Good. Thank you for sharing that. One last question I think Nick has, and then we'll call it good, is that of all the resources and positions and certificates, it seems like they get hard to keep straight. How do you grow to understand all of them? Like, how do you move through what you need to get and all of that?
So of all of the certifications and classes I've taken, I actually have a record. I have a document that I update fairly regularly of everything I've done, so that if I know how to reference back, I can always check that out. Something that's always really good is that on your resume that you're going to share with people, and I could talk another like 2 hours on resumes, thanks to one of my previous professors. We had theater career development classes that really showcased building a resume or a CV, which we don't really use much here in the US. But it lays out all of your job skills and certifications. So that I have a special skill section under general that has my my ESET classes, that has the console trainings I have taken and passed, as well as Red Cross, my certification for that. And I guess that's the biggest way is, I guess it's just really just keeping that track of everything you've done. I have a big web browser file of all of my favorite console trainings that I know I'm going to refer back to sometimes if I haven't quite caught the grasp of, because there's a million ways to do each thing in one of these lighting consoles that that are all for different uses that get the same end product. So it's knowing your way around those and finding what resources that you're going to be able to keep and use for a long time that are going to be able to help people along the way. I think just, yeah, I keep a straight record of them. I know it's probably not very pretty or common, but I love Word documents of just lists of stuff I've done.
Yeah. Well, and then also relying, I think, on your mentors. You've talked about the different people that you leaned on, not just educators, but also people in the field, watching what they do, asking them questions, and then if they make a suggestion or, you see that come in front of your path, just seizing it. You may not know in advance, hey, it'd be great for me to have this particular training or this particular certificate, but your mentor has it, or it pops up, you just are like, hey, there's an opportunity there. I better take it. I better seize it. It's kind of just constantly being awake and aware, and ready to jump when you need to.
I have a little road journal that is specific to A Bronx Tale, but the first 5 pages in it are my entire load-in track and everything my previous head mic told me to work on. I just got a message from my associate designer, but I have that whole journal of the load-in, and then I have 2 pages dedicated to every city I've been to that has, the head's name of that theater, the locals I've worked for, all of my favorite restaurants, and then all of the cool stuff they've told me about. They're like, hey, there's this new tool out that actually works this. Or here's a very specific, I don't know why this one came to mind, but a lubricant for your cam lock connectors for power distribution. I was like, that's super helpful. I'm gonna write that down in my little journal.
Right.
So I have a running log of every single day or week by week of everywhere I go of what I learn, what I've heard from people.
Yeah.
I look through it constantly.
Yeah.
I'm just like, you know what? I think I was in Alabama, or I was in Providence, Rhode Island when I learned about this. Let me look back and see what it is, and then I'll take my time, if I have time, to research it later on, and then make a mental note or order something. I'm a little meticulous when it comes to that. I love recording things, and that's the best way I'm going to be able to remember it. I personally am a very tactile learner. I learn best while doing things on the job or hearing it from people's mouths. Mm-hmm. So if I hear it first and then I can write it down later and have that to remember, I feel like I'm golden,
Awesome. Nick, do you have any other questions? He's been messaging me, so then I ask you along the way. I think a lot of what you've been saying, Mitch, is really helpful. Because it's such a broad spectrum, the tech theater thing, but the things that are golden, like you said, are being willing to work in a team, being willing to put yourself out there, being willing to kind of step a little bit outside of what you think the ideal job part of your job is, and doing, the nitty gritty hard work stuff here, and then also seizing opportunity, connecting with people, and just, knowing where you want to be and advocating for yourself to get there.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I think we're good. Well, thank you so much, Mitch, for taking time to.
It's a fun opportunity to talk to you guys.
Yeah, and we wish you well whenever this stuff is over with the COVID and we're able to be back in the spaces we love, doing the stuff we love, and all of that. So really, really appreciate your time and you sharing your journey and all of that. So hope you have a good one. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Bye,
Bye, guys.
everybody. Bye.